Fire walks the docks of Sirion like a living thing. Tar boils and runs in black rivers between bare feet. Someone screams for water, someone else for a child, and the sea answers with cold spray that tastes of iron and smoke. Elwing stumbles through ash, the Silmaril burning against her breast, and hands close on her cloak before she can reach the cliff. Above the surf, a chain glints. If you enjoy stepping into these dangerous alternate paths of Middle-earth, support the journey with a like and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments too. Where are you watching from, and which single choice would you change next to bend the whole legend? The havens of Sirion fell in a night that seemed too small to contain so much ending. The sky was low with soot, and the masts in the harbour stood like a forest on fire. The Sons of Fëanor came in from the north, with mail blackened by old grief and new purpose. And behind them came men hardened by exile, and elves whose faces carried a dimming light that had once been bright enough to shame the dawn. At the water's edge, the folk of the havens fought like those who knew there was nowhere left to retreat. Fishermen who had never held more than a net drove spears into armoured legs. A shipwright swung a mallet at a helm until his arms failed. A girl with hair singed short pressed a burning brand into her face and ran, laughing once in sudden shock before an arrow found her throat. All of it was noise. All of it was smell. Pineresin from broken hulls, wet rope, blood, the sharp sweetness of smoke when it first bites the lungs. Elwing ran not as a queen, but as a mother and a keeper. The Silmaril was wrapped in cloth and fear, its light punching through the weave like a heartbeat. She had carried it so long that it seemed less an object now than a weight of history tied to her bones. It was the last remnant of her grandfather's ruin and her father's crown, the prize that had already drowned Doriath in betrayal. Tonight, it drew the attackers as surely as a beacon draws moths into flame. Her sons had been sent away with those she trusted most, down alleys between storehouses to a boat half hidden in reeds. Elrond and Elros had not understood why their mother's hands had shaken when she kissed them, why she had whispered their names as if trying to carve them into the world. They were too young to carry the full shape of the doom that followed that duel. But they had seen enough to know the sound of panic, and they had smelled the smoke, and they had learned that a home could become a trap in a single hour. At the cliff above the sea, where in another tale Elwing would have chosen the fall, she found herself walled in by men with swords and elves with pale eyes. The wind off the water slapped her hair across her mouth. The surf below was a mouth of darkness, opening and closing. A captain stepped forward, his helmet gone, his face streaked with soot and salt. He was no brute. His gaze was steady, and it held something worse than hatred. It held certainty. "Lady of the Havens," he said, and in the roar of the waves his voice carried with the practiced weight of command, "Do not make this harder." Elwing's hand slid to the cloth at her breast. The Silmaril's warmth had become pain, and yet she clung to it as if it were the last coal of a dying hearth. Her eyes darted along the cliff, searching for a path that did not exist. Somewhere behind the captain, Maglor stood with his sword lowered. Even here, in the glare of burning ships, he looked like a man listening for a song that would not return. And behind him, taller and more rigid, Maedhros watched, as if he were looking at a decision already made long ago. Elwing drew breath to speak, perhaps to curse, perhaps to plead. The wind stole the first syllable. Then hands seized her arms. The chain the hook had promised bit into her wrists. She fought, and the fight was fierce and brief. A mailed fist struck her temple, and the world tilted. The Silmaril flared once, a hard white light cutting across the men's faces. And for an instant, everyone saw themselves as they truly were. Not victors, not avengers, but prisoners of an oath spoken in a brighter age. Maedhros took a step closer. His hair, once aflame, was dulled by ash. His eyes did not look away from the jewel. "Bring her," he said, "and bring the jewel." Maglor's voice came low, almost lost in the surf. "Do not touch it with bare hands." Maedhros did not answer. He did not have to. One of his men reached for the cloth and recoiled with a hiss as heat licked through his glove. Another drew a dagger to cut the wrapping away. The blade glowed red for a heartbeat and fell from numb fingers. Elwing, half stunned, watched them with a clarity that felt like frost. In the burning of those hands, she saw a truth that might have saved them all, if truth had ever been enough. The Silmaril did not belong to anyone now. It belonged only to the doom that followed it. They did not let her die. That was the change that broke the old road and opened this new one. She was dragged back through the havens, past bodies laid in doorways like discarded tools, past a brazier where a man tried to heat water for the wounded and only made steam that smelled of ash, past a child crouched beneath a shattered barrel, sucking on a splintered finger, eyes wide and dry. At the center of the ruin, Maedhros stood beneath a half-collapsed beam, the firelight playing over his scarred hand. He looked older than the world. He looked like a man who had lived too long, with a promise that was rotting him from the inside. "This ends," he said, and it was unclear whether he spoke to his brothers, to Elwing, or to the oath itself. "It ends tonight." Elwing's voice, when she found it, came rough with smoke. "You will not end it with me." Maglor met her gaze. Now in his eyes was something like apology, something like warning. "You do not know," he said softly, and for a moment his words were not accusation, but grief. "How many times we have told ourselves we could end it." She spat blood and salt. "And yet you are here." A shout rose outside, followed by the cracking collapse of a roof. Someone screamed again, but this time it was a scream of triumph. The havens were theirs. The sea, cold and indifferent, kept striking the shore as if it had never heard a name like Fëanor, as if it had never carried ships with banners bright as new leaves. In the reeds at the edge of the harbour, a half-hidden boat rocked without its passengers. The man meant to row it lay face down in the mud, an arrow through his shoulder. The twins were gone from that place. Someone had taken them, or someone had saved them. In the confusion of flames and steel, it was impossible to know which. In a storehouse that still stood, the remaining sons of Fëanor gathered. Amrod and Amras arrived late, armor dented, eyes shining with the feral relief of those who had survived again. Their relief did not last. When the cloth was peeled away and the Silmaril's light spilled across the room, their faces tightened as if each of them had been struck. The jewel sat in Maedhros' palm for a single heartbeat. He had not meant to touch it. He had meant only to take it. But his scarred hand closed reflexively around the light. The pain was immediate. It was not a burn like fire, but a clean, absolute agony that went through flesh and memory alike. Maedhros' teeth bared. His breath became a rasp. The Silmaril's light did not change. And that somehow made it worse, as if the jewel did not even acknowledge his suffering. Maglor caught his brother's wrist and forced the hand open. The Silmaril fell onto a folded cloak, and the fabric began to smoke. Amrod made a sound of triumph that turned into a snarl. "It burns him. It burns us all," Maglor said. Amras stepped forward, eyes locked on the jewel. "Then we will bear it. The oath demands it." Elwing sat bound against a post, watching as the jewel destroyed them without even moving. She had expected violence. She had expected death. She had not expected to see her captors wounded by what they had come to steal, as if the Silmaril itself were rejecting their claim. A thought came cold and sharp. If it burned them, it might also protect her. But protect her for what? To be carried like a trophy? To be used as ransom? To be kept alive long enough to suffer? Maedhros straightened with difficulty, his face damp with sweat. "Find the children," he said. "They are needed." Maglor's head lifted. Needed for what? Maedhros did not look at him. They are the heirs of Dior, and through Dior the jewel came to Elwing. Let them witness. Let them be the bridge. Let the world see that we do not murder children. Elwing laughed once, a sound like breaking glass. "You will not murder them," she said, "because you need them." Amrod's hand went to his sword. "Careful, lady." Maglor held up a palm, an old gesture of restraint. "No," he said. "Let her speak. She has earned that much." Elwing leaned forward as far as the chain allowed. The Silmaril's light painted her cheekbones white, leaving her eyes darker in contrast. "Your oath is a net," she said. "Every time you pull it tighter, you catch yourselves." For a moment, the only sound was the distant crackling of the havens burning. Outside, the tide pulled at the wreckage with patient hands. In another part of the ruined settlement, a young sailor named Hallen crawled beneath a fallen mast. His ears rang. He could not tell if the sound of battle had faded or if he had gone deaf. Around him lay splintered planks, and in the gaps he saw the sky, orange and black. He tasted tar and knew he would never forget it. He had been carrying a bucket when the first arrows fell. He had watched a friend pitch forward into the water and not rise. He had run, then turned back because a child had been crying near the fish racks. He had found the child, lifted him, and in that moment a shadow had fallen over them both. Now he lay under the mast with the child pressed against his chest. The boy's hair smelled of smoke and fear. Hallen's arm was numb where a beam pinned it. He tried to shift, and pain flared bright. Footsteps crunched nearby. Voices. Harsh laughter. A search. Hallen held his breath. The child's small fingers dug into his shirt. A blade tip slid into view, probing the debris. It paused inches from Hallen's face. He could see his own reflection in the steel, distorted and trembling. Then another voice, nearer and tired. "Leave them," it said. "There are other prizes." The blade withdrew. Hallen did not know whose voice had spared them. He did not know that in that moment Maglor had turned away from one more cruelty because he was already drowning in what he had done. When dawn came, it brought no clean light. The sun rose behind smoke and made the world a dull copper. The havens of Sirion were silent, except for the low moaning of the wounded and the hiss of wet embers. Elwing was led to the shore. Her wrists were raw. The chain was heavy, and the weight of it made her steps uneven. The Silmaril was wrapped again, carried by two men who kept their distance from it, as if it were a living serpent. At the waterline, Maedhros stood with his brothers. Their faces were set, not in triumph, but in the grim expression of those who had done a thing they could not undo. Behind them, ships were being readied, their hulls half charred but still seaworthy. They would flee. They always fled, and their flight always brought the oath with them like a shadow. A cry came from the reeds. A soldier dragged two boys forward, both filthy, both wide-eyed, Elrond and Elros. They had been found in a culvert beneath a storehouse, huddled against rats and listening to the world end above their heads. Elwing's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she forgot the chain, forgot the pain. Her sons were alive. She surged forward, and the chain snapped taut. A guard shoved her back. Elrond's eyes found hers. He did not cry. He stared with a solemnity too old for his face. Elros, fiercer, lunged toward her and was caught by the collar. "Mother," Elros whispered, and the word was small and huge at once. Maglor stepped between them and lowered himself until his face was level with the twins. His voice softened, and those near him could hardly believe it belonged to the same man who had marched with an army to burn a refuge. "You will not be harmed," he said. "I swear it." Elwing's laugh came again, but this time it broke on a sob. "Swear," she said, "as your father swore?" Maglor flinched as if struck. He looked away. He could not deny it. Maedhros spoke to the guards. "Bind them gently," he said, and the instruction was not mercy so much as strategy. The children were led onto a ship. Elwing followed, pulled by the chain. As the vessel pushed off, the survivors left behind on the shore looked small, like broken shells. Hallen, the sailor, stood among them with the rescued child asleep in his arms. He watched the ships depart and felt something inside him tear loose. The sea carried the captors away, and with them the light of the Silmaril. The havens of Sirion, last refuge of the Eldar in Beleriand, became smoke behind them. Far out on the water, the wind was sharp and clean compared to the air of the burned shore. It cut through cloth and carried salt into every wound. Elwing stood on deck with her sons huddled near Maglor, who wrapped a cloak around them with hands that trembled faintly. Elrond looked up at him. "Will you kill us?" he asked, and the question was not accusation. It was a child trying to understand the shape of a world where safety was always temporary. Maglor's jaw tightened. He did not answer at once. "No," he said finally, "not while I breathe." Elros stared at the horizon. "Then why did you come?" Maglor's gaze flicked toward the covered bundle where the Silmaril lay. "Because we were called," he said, "by words spoken before you were born. Words that are chains." Elwing listened, and in her mind the image of her husband rose like a star behind cloud. Eärendil, mariner, wandering the seas in search of a road no one could find. She had expected him to return soon. She had held the Silmaril not only as a treasure, but as a promise that he would come back to a light in the darkness. Would he find them now? Would he even know where to look? And if he found them, what would he find? A wife in chains, sons in enemy hands. The jewel that should have been his, wrapped in cloth and doom. The ship cut through grey waves toward the mouths of the Sirion, then angled west along the broken coasts. Above, gulls followed at a distance, crying like lost souls. On the third night, when the sea was calm and the stars were clear, Maedhros summoned Elwing. She was brought below deck into a narrow chamber that smelled of pitch and wet wood. A lantern swung with the motion of the ship, making shadows jump across faces. The Silmaril lay on a table, still wrapped, even covered. its light pressed through like dawn behind a curtain. Maedhros stood beside it. His brothers watched from the walls. Maglor remained near the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. "You will speak," Maedhros said to Elwing, "and you will speak truth. Tell us where your husband has gone." Elwing lifted her chin. "He went where he always goes," she said. "Into the west, into storms, into the places that swallow men." Maedhros' eyes narrowed. "He sought Valinor. He sought a way," Elwing corrected, "to beg for help." Amrod's laugh was harsh. "Help will not come. The Valar are deaf." Elwing's voice dropped. "Are they deaf?" she asked. "Or have you made them turn away?" That was one of the questions that would echo through the years. Were the powers silent because they did not care? Or because the world had been made so poisoned by pride that even the West hesitated to touch it? Maedhros' hand hovered over the cloth. He did not touch. He had learned. "If Eärendil reaches them," he said, "he will plead for you, for the jewel, for all the ruin of the Noldor, and if they answer, we will be judged." Maglor spoke then, his voice controlled but strained. "We have been judged already." Maedhros ignored him. "If the Valar come," he said to Elwing, "they will take the Silmaril. They will end our claim. The oath will be broken by force, and what will become of us then? Better to bring the jewel to where it cannot be taken." Elwing stared at him. "To Morgoth," she said. Silence fell, heavy as ballast. Amras' eyes flicked away, and in that small movement, Elwing saw that the thought had already been spoken among them in private. Perhaps only in whispers, perhaps with hands clenched around cups of bitter wine. Maglor's face went pale. "No," he said. The single word landed like a thrown stone. Maedhros' gaze hardened. "Then what?" he demanded. "We cannot keep it. It burns us. We cannot give it up. The oath will not allow it. Our brothers are dead. Our lands are ash. We have nothing left but this." Elwing leaned forward, the chains scraping the floor. "You have one thing left," she said. "Choice. Even now." Maedhros' lips curled. "Choice," he echoed, and the sound was almost a sob hidden under anger. "We chose once, on the shores of Aman. Do you think the world has let us choose since?" Maglor's hand went to the doorframe, white-knuckled. He looked at Elwing, and in his eyes was a plea he would never speak aloud. Give him a way out that did not require courage he no longer trusted himself to have. Elwing understood then that her capture was not merely a victory. It was a crack running through the Fëanorians' last cohesion. They were bound by oath, but they were not united in heart. If she could widen that crack, her sons might live. The Silmaril might be kept from falling into the darkest hands. And yet, what could one woman do against an oath that had dragged kingdoms into the sea? In the grey hours before dawn, while the ship creaked and the waves slapped steady as a heartbeat, Elwing spoke quietly to Maglor through the bars of a small hold. He sat with his back against the wall, his sword laid aside as if it disgusted him. The twins slept near him, curled like pups beneath a cloak. "You play the gentle captor," Elwing said. "Do you think it will save you?" Maglor's gaze stayed on the sleeping children. "I do not think I can be saved," he said. Elwing's voice softened against her will. "Then save them." He closed his eyes. "That is what I am trying to do." "Trying is not enough," she said, and the words were sharp because they had to be. "There will come a moment when you must choose, when Maedhros commands and the oath pulls, and you will either obey or break." Maglor opened his eyes again, and in them was the weary humor of someone who had lived too long with tragedy. "Break the oath," he murmured. as if it were a rope. "What if it is?" Elwing asked. "What if you only believe it cannot break because you have never dared to test it?" That was the second question that would haunt him. Was the oath a law of the world, or a prison built from fear? Maglor did not answer. He laid a hand on Elros's shoulder, gently, as if reminding himself what he still cared about. Then he began to sing under his breath, a melody so old it seemed to belong to starlight. It made the hold feel briefly larger, as if there were room for mercy even here. Days later, the ships reached the shattered coasts near the mouths of the Galleon, where broken forests leaned toward the sea. Here the Sons of Fëanor had once held lands of their own. Now those lands were empty, haunted by wind and the distant rumble of Angban's far-off machinery. The air carried a faint taint, like metal left too long in rain. They made camp in the ruins of an old watchtower, and Medros sent riders east to scout, seeking rumors of Eärendil's return and paths that might lead either to hiding or to one final strike. In that camp, a betrayal took shape slowly, like a storm building beyond the horizon. Amrod and Amras had watched Medros' restraint with mounting anger. They were young enough, despite all they had seen, to believe that action could still fix what had been broken. They whispered together at night, their voices low. They watched Maglor with suspicion. They watched Elwing with something like superstition, as if she were a cursed talisman rather than a prisoner. On the seventh night, as cold rain began to fall, Amras slipped into the chamber where the Silmaril was kept. He wore thick gloves. He carried a chest lined with lead and cloth, stolen from the remnants of Doriath's treasure. For even the rumor of the Silmarils had reached far places and taught men strange precautions. He lifted the jewel, and pain lanced through him even through the layers. He bit back a cry, sweat bursting on his brow. The Silmaril's light flared, and for an instant the rain outside seemed to freeze in midair, each drop a shard. Amrod stepped in, eyes wide. "Hurry!" he hissed. They were almost gone when Maglor appeared in the doorway, sword drawn, not in anger, but in desperation. "Put it down," he said. Amras' voice shook. "You would stop us?" Maglor's eyes flicked to the jewel. "Yes." Amrod's face twisted. "Because of her," he spat. "Because she has softened you." Maglor's jaw tightened. "Because I know where this road ends." Amras forced the chest lid open, trying to lower the Silmaril inside. His hands trembled violently. The light poured across his arms, and the flesh beneath the gloves began to blister. A smell rose, sharp and sickening, like hair burning. Still, he did not let go. Maglor stepped forward. "You will die," he said. "Then let me die with it," Amras gasped. Amrod shoved Maglor hard, and the two collided. Steel flashed. The chamber was too small. The lantern swung wildly. Shadows turned into claws. Outside, rain hammered on stone. Far off, thunder growled like the memory of dragons. In the struggle, Amras stumbled. The chest tipped. The Silmaril rolled free, and for a heartbeat it lay on the floor, light spilling across wet stone. Amrod, with a cry, dove for it barehanded. The jewel met his skin like judgment. Amrod's scream was not loud at first. It rose in pitch as pain tore through him. His hand clenched reflexively, and the Silmaril's light flared brighter, burning through flesh or through bone. The smell became unbearable. Maglor froze, horror washing his face clean of anger. "No," he breathed. Amrod fell to his knees, his arms shaking. He tried to open his fingers. He could not. His tendons had seized, or his will had. His eyes rolled back, and his scream broke into a gurgling gasp. In seconds, he was dead, his body slumped over his ruined hand, the Silmaril still clenched as if it had fused to him. Amras backed away, shaking. "We did it," he whispered. But it was not triumph, it was disbelief. We did it. Maedhros burst into the chamber, sword in hand. His gaze took in the scene. Dead brother, living brother, Maglor standing like a man about to fall. For a long moment, Maedhros did not speak. Rain dripped from his hair. His face looked carved from stone. Then he stepped forward and pried the Silmaril from Amrod's charred hand with his own scarred fingers, wincing as agony flared. He dropped it into the chest and slammed the lid. "This is what the oath gives," Maedhros said, and his voice was quiet. That quiet was worse than shouting. Brother killing brother, jewel burning flesh, and still it does not end. Elwing, dragged in to witness, stared at the corpse and felt a strange, cold sorrow. She had wanted the Fëanorians divided. She had not wished for this particular price. But in the legends, the price always arrived, indifferent to wishes. Maedhros turned on Amras. "You would steal from me?" he asked. Amras' voice cracked. "From you?" he echoed. "It is not yours. It is ours. It was promised." "It was promised," Maedhros agreed. And his eyes flicked to Maglor as if asking silently if Maglor understood now what choice meant. "And promises have made us monsters." He raised his sword. Maglor moved like a man waking from a dream. He stepped between them. "No," he said. "Not this." Maedhros' blade hovered inches from Maglor's throat. "Stand aside." Maglor did not move. Behind him, Elwing saw Elrond and Elros in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Their faces were white in the Silmaril's leaking light. This is what they will learn, Elwing thought, with a bitterness that tasted of ash. This is what we teach the young, that oaths matter more than blood. Maedhros' sword arm trembled. In that tremor, the whole history of the Noldor seemed to quiver. Then Maedhros lowered the blade a fraction. "Take him," he said to the guards. "Bind him. He will not touch the jewel again." Amras was dragged away, sobbing in rage and fear. Maedhros looked down at Amrod's body. "Burn him," he said. "Do not bury him. The earth of Beleriand is already too cursed." That night, Amrod's pyre lit the ruins of the watchtower, and the rain turned to steam around it. Ordinary soldiers sat with their backs to stones, hands wrapped around cold cups, watching the flames eat armor and flesh. They did not speak much. They had come for a jewel, and now they had watched it kill a prince of the Noldor like a common man. One of them, a young archer from the east, whispered to another, "If it burns them, what will it do to us?" No one answered. In the far west, beyond the sight of any shore, a ship moved on dark water under a sky thick with stars. Vingilot, Eärendil's vessel, was lean and bright even in darkness, built with craft, learned from the Eldar, and guided by dreams that came from Ulmos' deep places. Eärendil stood at the prow, his hair salt-stiff, his hands rough with rope. He had been at sea so long that the motion of land beneath his feet, when he remembered it, felt like a story he had heard as a child. He watched the horizon with the gaze of someone searching not for a coastline, but for a miracle. Behind him, his crew moved quietly. They were a small company, men and elves bound together by stubborn hope. They had left Sirion earlier to seek news and allies, trusting that Elwing could hold the havens until they returned. Now, days behind schedule, they were racing home through waters that felt wrong, as if the sea itself knew bad news. A gull circled and cried. Eärendil frowned. Gulls did not come this far out unless something drew them. On the second day, they began to smell smoke. At first, it was faint, an imagined bitterness in the wind. Then it thickened, and the sun became a pale disk. Eärendil's heart tightened. He did not speak, but his hands gripped the rail until his knuckles whitened. Vingilot cut forward, sails straining. When the havens of Sirion finally rose from the haze, they did not look like a refuge. They looked like a wound. Blackened timbers jutted from the shore. The harbour was littered with wreckage. The air was still, heavy with the stench of burned pitch and death. Eärendil stepped onto land and felt the ground crunch under his boots, not with sand, but with ash and charcoal. He walked through ruins with a growing dread that became almost numbness. He called Elwing's name once, then again, louder. The sound seemed obscene in the silence, like laughter at a funeral. He found bodies, friends, strangers. He found a woman he had spoken with only weeks ago, now curled against a wall as if sleeping. He found a child's wooden toy, half burned, lying in a puddle reflecting the grey sky. At the cliff where Elwing had once watched for his sails, he found only footprints and a broken clasp. No blood, no body. The sea below surged and withdrew, blank as ever. Hallen, the sailor, approached him hesitantly, carrying the rescued child on his hip. His face was drawn, his eyes ringed with soot. He bowed awkwardly, then straightened as if remembering that grief made ranks meaningless. "They took her," Hallen said, voice hoarse. "They took the lady, and the jewel." Eärendil did not move. For a long moment, he could not find breath. When he did, it came in a shudder. "And the children?" he asked, though he already feared the answer. Hallen's gaze dropped. "Taken too," he said. The words landed, and something in Eärendil's expression changed. It was not rage, not yet. It was a kind of hollowing, as if a vital part of him had been scooped out and replaced with cold air. He turned back toward Vingilot without another word. His crew followed, faces grim. Hallen watched them go, feeling suddenly as if he had just handed a man a knife and told him where his heart was. Out on the water again, Eärendil spoke at last. His voice was low, and it carried the certainty of someone who had reached the edge of patience. "We go west," he said. One of the elves, an old mariner named Voronoi, who had once served Ulmos designs, hesitated. "Without the jewel?" he asked. Eärendil's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Without it," he said, "if I cannot bring a light to the west, I will bring a wound. Let them see what their silence has allowed." Would the Valar listen to a plea carried only in grief, without the blazing proof of the Silmaril? That was the third question, and it would be answered, but not quickly and not kindly. He set his course into waters that had swallowed better ships than his. Storms rose like walls. Fog closed in, thick as wool, muffling sound until the world felt wrapped and suffocating. More than once, Vingilot barely escaped reefs that seemed to appear from nothing. At night, shapes moved under the water, vast and slow, and the crew spoke less and prayed more. In the camp on the broken coast, Maedhros received word from scouts that Eärendil had returned to Sirion and left again, sailing west with urgency. The news struck him like a physical blow. "He will reach them," Maglor said, and there was fear in his voice, not for himself alone, but for the world. Maedhros' gaze fixed on the chest that held the Silmaril. "Then we are outpaced," he said. "If the Valar come, they will take everything. We must move. To Angband? Maglor asked, disgust and dread twisting his features. Maedhros' voice hardened. There is nowhere else. If the oath is to be fulfilled, it must be fulfilled where Morgoth sits. Let us see if he bleeds. Maglor stared at him. You would bring that jewel to the enemy? Maedhros' eyes flashed. Would you rather it be taken west, never to be seen again? Elwing listened from her chains and felt a cold horror settle. The Silmaril was about to become not merely a prize fought over, but a weapon, a lure, a bargaining chip between doomed princes and the first Dark Lord. The thought made her stomach twist. That night, as Maedhros planned, Elwing spoke again to Maglor, her voice barely more than breath. Do you understand what you are doing? She asked. If you take the jewel to Angband, you give Morgoth a light from the Blessed Realm. You give him proof that even the West can be stolen. Maglor's face was drawn. I know, he whispered. Then stop him. Maglor's eyes flicked toward the sleeping twins. And what happens to them, he asked, when Maedhros decides they are a threat? Elwing's throat tightened. She hated that he was right to fear it. She hated that her sons' lives were now pieces on a board where every move was stained. Take them, she said. Take them and run. And you? Maglor asked. Elwing swallowed. If you run, Maedhros will kill me, she said. Or worse. But if you stay, he may kill us all anyway. Maglor looked at her for a long time. In that gaze was a slow decision forming, heavy as iron. If I betray him, he said, I betray my brother. Elwing's voice grew firm. You have already betrayed him, she said, by letting the oath kill what was good in you. Betray the oath instead. Before dawn, Maglor moved. He did not move loudly. He did not shout a challenge or call allies. He simply took the twins, wrapped in cloaks, and cut their bonds with careful hands. Elrond woke first, eyes blinking in darkness. Maglor placed a finger to his lips. Elrond nodded once, understanding too well. Elros woke next and almost spoke. Maglor's hand covered his mouth gently. Elros' eyes widened, then narrowed. He nodded too. Maglor moved to Elwing's chains, knife in hand. Elwing held her breath. The moment stretched. She could hear the sea beyond the rocks, and for an instant she imagined leaping into it after all, letting cold water close over her head, ending this before it could become worse. But her sons stood behind Maglor, watching. She could not abandon them. Not now, not when the chance of escape hung by a thread. Maglor's knife slid into the lock, a voice behind them, like a blade drawn slowly. What are you doing? Maedhros stood in the doorway of the shelter, hair loose, eyes burning in the dim. He had not slept. Perhaps he never truly slept anymore. Maglor froze, knife still in the lock. Elrond and Elros pressed back into shadow. Maedhros' gaze swept the scene and landed on the twins. His face tightened. Brother, Maglor said, and his voice was steady in a way that surprised even him. It has to end. Maedhros stepped forward. Not like this, he said. Elwing felt a sudden, sharp clarity. This was another turning point, another place where the tale could end. If Maedhros killed Maglor now, the twins would be dragged back into captivity, and the march to Angband would go on. If Maglor killed Maedhros, the oath might fracture, but blood would seal the fracture forever. Maedhros' hand moved toward his sword. Maglor's hand tightened on the knife, then released it. He did not reach for his own sword. Instead, he stepped fully between Maedhros and the children. If you want them, Maglor said, you will have to kill me. Maedhros' eyes glistened. Do you think I will not?" Maglor's voice broke slightly. "I think you will," he said. "That is why I am here." Maedhros drew his sword in a single clean motion. The blade caught faint light and seemed to hum. He lifted it, the point angled toward Maglor's chest. Elwing's heart hammered. Elrond's hand found Elros in the darkness. Maedhros' arm trembled. Then, from outside, a horn blew. One long note, then another, a scout signal. Danger! Approach! Maedhros' head snapped toward the sound. He cursed in Quenya, an old word that tasted of Ammon and ash. He shoved past Maglor and strode out. Maglor exhaled shakily. He looked at Elwing, eyes wide with the shock of nearly dying. "Go," Elwing whispered. "Take them." Maglor hesitated only a heartbeat. Then he pulled the twins close and slipped out the back into the wet pre-dawn darkness. Elwing remained, chains still locked, watching him vanish. She had pushed him into betrayal, and now she paid for it. Outside, Maedhros found the cause of the horn. A band of orcs, scouts from Angband, had crept down from the north, drawn by smoke and movement. They skulked among the rocks, yellow eyes gleaming, crude blades ready. In their midst, towering over them, was something worse. A winged messenger, a fell spirit in shape of a great bat, its eyes like coals. It bore on its neck a collar of black iron etched with runes. It spoke with a voice like rusted gates. "The Lord of Darkness knows," it said. "He knows you carry stolen light." Maedhros' face went rigid. The messenger's gaze flicked toward the shelter where the Silmaril was kept. "Bring it," it hissed. "Bring it to Angband, or we will bring you." Maedhros did not answer. He drew his sword and cut down the first orc that came near. His men surged forward, battle erupting in the wet dawn. Steel rang. Orc blood stank like rancid meat. The fell messenger beat its wings and rose, shrieking, and its shriek carried north like a signal flare. The fight ended quickly, but the damage was done. Morgoth had been alerted. The Silmaril's light, even hidden, had drawn the gaze of the enemy. Maglor ran with the twins along the coastline, keeping low amongst scrub and broken stone. Rain began again, cold needles that soaked through cloaks. Elros stumbled, and Maglor caught him, lifting him for a few steps until the boy could run again. Elrond looked back once toward the camp. "Mother," he whispered. Maglor's jaw clenched. "She is alive," he said, though he did not know it. "Hold to that." They reached a small inlet where an old boat lay half buried in sand. Maglor pushed it into the water, hands shaking with haste. The tide tugged at it like an impatient hand. As they climbed in, Elros looked up at Maglor. "Are you our enemy?" he asked. Maglor hesitated, and then he shook his head slowly. "I have been," he said. "I do not want to be anymore." They pushed off into grey water, heading south and east, away from the path to Angband, away from Maedhros' tightening net. Behind them, Maedhros discovered the escape within the hour. Elwing heard his roar from within the shelter, a sound torn from the deepest part of him. He burst in, sword drawn, and seized Elwing by the hair, yanking her head back. His face was twisted in fury and panic. "Where are they?" he demanded. Elwing's scalp burned. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Gone," she said. Maedhros' grip tightened. "You think you have won," he snarled. "You have only made this worse." Elwing's voice came through clenched teeth. "It was already worse," she said. "You just refused to see it." Maedhros shoved her down. "If I cannot have the children," he said, breath ragged, "then you will be my hostage. You will be my shield against the Valar and against Morgoth alike." Elwing lifted herself onto her elbows, hair hanging in her face. "Against Morgoth," she repeated. "Do you truly believe he will bargain?" Medros' eyes flicked away. For a moment, fear showed. Then it hardened into determination, because determination was easier than fear. He ordered the camp broken, and the Silmaril moved. The remaining Fëanorians marched north, Elwing dragged along, her feet bleeding on stone. The sky above grew darker as they neared the shadow of Thangorodrim, and the air began to taste of bitterness and soot even without fires. Ordinary soldiers stumbled behind princes, coughing as ash drifted from the north like grey snow. A man from the Farlas, who had survived the fall of Breithumbar years ago, muttered to his companion, "We are walking into the mouth that ate our fathers." His companion, younger, forced a laugh that sounded like choking. "At least," he said, "we will not have to run again." They did run again, later, but first they marched. In the westmost seas, Eärendil fought his way through storm and darkness. Without the Silmaril, the world seemed less willing to open. The straight road was hidden, if it existed at all, and the enchanted isles that once snared sailors with sleep and forgetfulness still drifted like traps. One night, fog wrapped Vingelot so tightly that the crew could not see their own hands. The ship moved as if in a dream. Voices whispered from the mist, soft and inviting, calling names the men had not spoken aloud in years. One sailor stepped toward the rail, eyes blank, murmuring his mother's name, and nearly went overboard before Voronwar grabbed him and slapped him hard enough to leave a handprint. "Do not listen," Voronwar snarled. "If you sleep, you die." Eärendil stood at the prow, face wet with mist. He clenched his jaw until it ached. In the old tale, the Silmaril's light would have pierced this fog, would have warded off these enchantments like a blade. Now he had only stubbornness and a desperate prayer. "Ulmo," he whispered into the grey, voice barely audible. "If you ever cared for the children, answer." The fog did not answer. The sea did not answer. But the next day, a wind rose from the west that smelled not of salt alone, but of something clean, like rain falling on stone that had never known smoke. Voronwar lifted his head, eyes narrowing. "A change," he said. "Hold fast." For a moment, hope flickered. But hope without a beacon was fragile. How many days could a man sail toward a dream before the dream turned into madness? Back under the shadow of Thangorodrim, Maedhros reached the outer defenses of Angband. The land here was a blasted plain, cracked and black, with fumes seeping from fissures. The sky was a ceiling of smoke. No birds flew, no grass grew. Even the stones seemed dead. Orcs watched from trenches. Trolls moved like boulders given hunger. And above, on a ridge of slag, stood a figure tall and terrible, armored in darkness that drank light. Sauron, Morgoth's lieutenant, had come out to meet them. His gaze fell on the covered chest carried by Maedhros men. He smiled slightly. The smile did not reach his eyes. "Princes of the Noldor," Sauron said, his voice smooth as oil. "How far you have fallen, to bring gifts to the very lord you once defied." Maedhros stepped forward, sword in hand. His face was set in hard lines. "We did not come to kneel," he said. Sauron's smile widened a fraction. "No," he agreed. "You came because you cannot help yourselves." He gestured, and orcs surged forward, surrounding the Fëanorians. Maedhros men tightened their grip on weapons. Elwing, dragged near the front, tasted metal in the air and felt her skin prickle as if the land itself rejected her presence. Sauron's gaze landed on her. "And you have brought the Lady of the Havens," he said. "How thoughtful. Morgoth will enjoy the symmetry." Elwing met his eyes and felt a chill deeper than fear. This was not a brute enemy. This was a mind like a blade. "What will you do?" Maedhros demanded. "Will you take the jewel by force?" "It will burn you." Sauron's eyes flicked to the chest. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps we will let it burn you and then take it from your corpse." Maedhros' jaw tightened. He realized then that he had walked into a trap built not merely of orcs and trenches, but of understanding. Morgoth had always understood the Noldor's pride. Sauron understood their desperation. An orc captain stepped forward and struck one of Maedhros' men with a mace. The man fell. The chest tipped. For a heartbeat, the cloth covering slipped, and the Silmaril's light spilled out onto the blasted ground. The land seemed to flinch. Even Sauron's smile faltered, replaced by something like hunger. From deep within Angband, a sound answered, a distant, slow laugh, like mountains grinding together. Morgoth had felt the light. "Bring it in," Sauron said softly. "All of you." Maedhros raised his sword. "No," he said, and his voice was a snarl. "Not like this." He swung, cutting down the nearest orc. His men surged with him, desperation turning into violence. For a brief moment, the Sons of Fëanor fought like the legends still meant something. Steel flashed in the poisoned air. Orcs fell in heaps. But Angband was not a battlefield meant to be won. It was a mouth meant to swallow. Trolls lumbered forward, their thick hides turning blades. Arrows fell like black rain. The Fëanorian host was pushed back, step by step, toward trenches lined with spikes. In the chaos, Elwing saw her chance. A guard stumbled, struck from behind. His hand loosened on her chain. Elwing wrenched free and ran, feet slipping on ash. She did not know where she ran, and only that she could not stand still and be dragged into that fortress. She ran toward the fissures where fumes rose. She ran past a heap of bones. She ran until her lungs burned and her throat tasted of smoke. Then a hand seized her from behind. Not Maedhros, not Maglor's. Sauron's grip was like iron. He hauled her close and spoke into her ear. "Do you think you can flee fate by running?" he murmured. "Fate enjoys the chase." Elwing twisted, trying to bite, to claw. He held her effortlessly. He lifted his other hand, and in it gleamed a small ring of black metal, cold and plain. "Do you know what I am making?" Sauron asked, voice almost conversational, as if they stood in a hall rather than a slaughter field. "A way to bind what cannot be held. A way to keep promises from breaking." Elwing's breath hitched. She stared at the ring, at its emptiness, and felt a dread that reached far beyond this moment. This was not yet the One Ring, not yet forged, but the idea was here, naked and hungry, domination shaped into metal. "What will you bind?" she rasped. Sauron's eyes gleamed. "Light," he said. "Will. Souls. And perhaps, if Morgoth permits, a jewel that burns hands and breaks hearts." Behind them, Maedhros' men were collapsing. Amras fell beneath a troll's club, his skull cracking like a dropped pot. He died without a word, and the rain of ash settled on his open eyes. Maedhros saw it and roared, charging like a man already dead. He cut down orcs in a fury, reaching toward the chest that held the Silmaril. He reached it, seized it, and for a heartbeat, it looked as if he might break free, might flee into the wasteland with the jewel and the last shreds of his pride. Then a spear took him in the side, punching through armor. Another struck his leg. He stumbled. The chest fell. The lid burst open. The Silmaril rolled free and came to rest in a shallow depression in the ash, shining like a star fallen into a grave. Everything paused for a heartbeat. Orcs hesitated, eyes wide. Even trolls seemed to slow, drawn by the light. Methros crawled toward it, blood dark on black ground. His scarred hand reached out, fingers trembling inches from the jewel. Would he take it again, knowing it would burn him? Would he cling to the oath even as it killed him? The fourth question hung in the air like a held breath. Maedhros' fingers closed around the Silmaril. His scream tore through the wasteland. It was not only pain, it was rage and grief and something like relief, as if at last he had reached the final note of a long, terrible song. He lifted the jewel, light blazing, and with a last surge of strength, he threw it, not toward Angband, but into a fissure at his side, a crack in the earth that breathed hot fumes. The Silmaril fell, spinning, its light flashing against the dark, and then it vanished into the deep. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. Sauron's grip on Elwing tightened. "No," he whispered, and the calm mask cracked, revealing a flash of true fury. Maedhros collapsed, his burned hands smoking, his eyes fixed on the fissure, as if trying to follow the jewel with his gaze. His lips moved. Perhaps he spoke his father's name. Perhaps he spoke no name at all. Then his head fell back, and he was still. The oath had not been fulfilled. It had been denied by the very hand that had clung to it longest. Sauron released Elwing abruptly, as if she had become worthless without the jewel. She stumbled and fell to her knees in ash. Orcs surged forward, grabbing bodies, stripping armor, dragging the living away. Maglor was not there. Maglor had fled with the twins. But now Maedhros was dead. Amrod dead. Amras dead. Amras and Amrod taken by the jewel and the war, and the House of Fëanor was collapsing into its final fragments. Elwing looked up toward Angband and felt, for the first time in many years, a thin thread of relief. The Silmaril was not in Morgoth's hands. It was not in the west. It was hidden in the deep places of the earth, where neither oath nor enemy could easily reach. Then disquiet followed that relief like a shadow. If the Silmaril was lost, how would Eärendil find the way? How would the Valar be moved? How long would Morgoth remain unchallenged? The answer began to form in the days that followed. Morgoth did not need the Silmaril to continue his ruin. He needed only time. Maglor, with the twins, reached the mouths of a river that ran through empty lands. They stole food from abandoned camps. They drank from cold streams. They hid from orc patrols that grew more frequent as Morgoth's attention widened outward, hunting not only rebels, but any flicker of resistance. At night, Maglor taught the twins words in Quenya and Sindarin, as if language could build a wall between them and the horror behind. Elrond listened quietly, absorbing everything. Elros asked questions like a blade. Why did the Noldor leave the west? Why did Morgoth hate the light? Why did oaths matter more than children? Maglor answered as best he could, and sometimes he failed and sat staring at his hands as if he could still see the Silmaril's burn marks on them. One evening, as they sheltered beneath a leaning stone, Elrond spoke softly. "You loved them," he said, meaning Maedhros and the others. Maglor's throat worked. "Yes," he whispered. "Then why did you follow them?" Elros asked. Maglor looked out at the darkening horizon. "Because love can be used like a chain," he said, "and because I did not know how to be anything else." Elwing was taken into Angband's outer dungeons. Sauron did not kill her. Morgoth, amused by broken things, kept her alive as a specimen of defiance. The air in the cells was damp and tasted of mold and old blood. Water dripped steadily, each drop a slow count of time. Elwing's hair lost its shine. Her hands became raw from iron, but her eyes remained hard. Sauron visited sometimes, questions wrapped in polite tone. "Where is the jewel?" he asked more than once. "I did not throw it," Elwing answered each time. "No," Sauron agreed, "but you inspired the hand." Elwing learned in those interrogations that Sauron was not merely a servant. He was a student. He watched how oaths broke men. He watched how love could be leveraged. He watched how even light could be turned into a weapon by the simple act of making others kill for it. One day, Sauron spoke almost casually. "Eärendil sails west," he said. Elwing's heart lurched. "He will reach it," she said, forcing confidence. Sauron's eyes held hers. "Without the jewel," he said softly, "the west may never open, and if it does not, then this world belongs to us for as long as we can hold it." Elwing felt cold spread through her chest. She thought of the havens burning. She thought of her sons running through rain. She thought of Eärendil in fog, searching for a road that might not answer. In the westmost sea, Eärendil finally reached a strange stillness, a place where the water became glassy and the air tasted like nothing at all. The sky above was a hard, pale dome. His crew moved as if afraid to breathe. Voronwar whispered, "We are near." Eärendil stood at the prow, eyes narrowed, searching. There was no light, no guiding star, only emptiness that felt like a closed door. He raised his voice, and it carried unnaturally far across the still water. "Lords of the West," he called. "Hear me." No answer came. He called again, his voice roughening. He named the losses, the fall of Gondolin, the ruin of Doriath, the burning of Sirion. He spoke Elwing's name, and his voice cracked on it. He spoke his sons' names, and his breath hitched. Still nothing. Desperation rose like bile. Eärendil turned to Voronwar. "Is this it?" he demanded. A wall of silence? Voronwar's face was pale. "It was not meant to be reached by mortal will alone," he said. "The Silmaril was a sign, a key." Eärendil stared at the blank horizon. The truth hit him then with brutal clarity. He had come too late, and without the jewel, the world had no proof bright enough to pierce the West's isolation. His plea was only words in wind. He sank to his knees on the deck, the wood cold beneath him. For a moment, he looked like any man broken by grief. Then he rose, slowly, as if something inside him refused to die, even when hope did. He turned the ship around. "If the West will not come," he said, voice low, "then I will become the West for those who cannot reach it. And I will carry the story east until someone with power must listen." It was a bitter resolve, and it reshaped everything. In the old tale, Eärendil's voyage ended with light in the sky, a star that gave hope to Middle-earth. In this tale, he returned not as a star, but as a wandering witness, a mariner bearing news like a plague of truth. Years passed. Morgoth's shadow thickened. Without the War of Wrath, Beleriand did not drown quickly. It rotted slowly. Forests withered. Rivers ran foul. Orcs multiplied. Men and elves who might have rebuilt instead scattered like leaves before a storm. Hallan, the sailor of Sirion, led a small band of refugees eastward, away from the poisoned coast. They traveled through rain that smelled wrong, through fields where crops refused to grow. They crossed into lands that later ages would call Eriador, and there they found hills and winds and a kind of emptiness that was almost peace. They built huts. They dug wells. They tried to forget. But at night, the older ones would sit by fire and speak of the sea and a light that had been stolen, and their children would listen with wide eyes. Farther east, among plains that would one day cradle the horse lords of Rohan, tribes of men watched the sky dim year by year. Winters grew longer. Wolves grew bold. A herdsman stood one night beside his cattle, breath steaming, and listened to a distant, unnatural rumble that seemed to come from the west. He did not know the name Morgoth, but he felt in his bones that something immense and hungry was shifting. In the south, where Gondor would eventually rise in another history, the coasts saw ships less often. Without Numenor's later glory, no great sea kings came to build white towers. Instead, scattered mariners arrived in small boats, gaunt and haunted, speaking of a lost west and a darkness that had not been driven back. They traded salt and stories, and then they moved on, restless as if pursued by fate itself. Even the Shire, that green pocket of later comfort, felt the ripple in distant centuries. Halflings still wandered into Eärendil's soft lands, seeking quiet. They found it for a time. But the quiet had an edge, as if the world held its breath. The stars seemed slightly dimmer than they should have been. Old folk spoke of nights when the west wind carried a faint smell of ash, though no fire burned nearby. Maglor, older and hollow-eyed, eventually brought Elrond and Elros to a hidden refuge of elves who still resisted in secret. There, the twins grew into youth under a sky that never fully brightened. Elrond became thoughtful, patient, carrying sorrow like a cloak. Elros became fierce, restless, angry at the injustice of a world shaped by the sins of the mighty. One night, when Elros was near manhood, he confronted Maglor by a river. "You stole us," Elros said. Maglor did not deny it. "Yes, you saved us," Elrond countered softly. Maglor looked between them, and tears gathered in his eyes. "I tried," he said. "I tried to make one good act out of a mountain of evil." Elros' jaw clenched. "Where is our mother?" he demanded. Maglor's face tightened. He had not known for certain, but rumors drifted even through hidden places, carried by frightened travelers and escaped captives. A lady held in Angband, a woman whose eyes did not dim, a prisoner used as a lesson. In darkness, Maglor said, voice breaking. In the north, Elros turned away, fists clenched. "Then I will go," he said. Elrond's hand shot out, catching his brother's arm. "You will die," he said, and his voice was not fear for himself, but terror of losing the only family left. Elros' eyes flashed. "Perhaps," he said, "but if we do nothing, we die slowly anyway." The fifth question rose then, unspoken but heavy. What is the cost of survival when survival means accepting injustice? Elrond did not let go. "We will find another way," he said, though he did not know what it was. Maglor watched them and felt the old song inside him twist into something like prayer. He had wanted to save them from the oath. He had only carried them into a world where oaths had already reshaped everything. In Angband, Elwing endured. Years blurred. Pain became routine. She learned to measure time by the rare visits of Sauron and the occasional distant tremor that shook dust from the ceiling. She heard screams from other cells. She heard orc laughter. She heard, sometimes, faint music drifting down corridors when Morgoth's captains drank and celebrated. One day, long after hope should have died, a commotion rose outside her cell. Shouts, clashing steel, a horn clear and bright sounding once, then again, a sound like memory of Gondolin's walls. Elwing forced herself upright, heart pounding. Could it be? Could anyone be mad enough to assault Angban's outer dungeons? The door to her cell burst open, and for a heartbeat, she saw a figure silhouetted by torchlight. A man in sea-worn armor, hair dark, eyes blazing with a grief that had become a weapon. Eärendil. He looked older, harder. His face was carved by wind and sorrow. He stared at her, as if afraid she were a dream. "Elwing," he whispered. Her throat tightened. No words came. She reached out, trembling. He stepped forward and took her hands, and the warmth of him felt unreal in that cold place. "I could not reach the west," he said quickly, voice fierce. "I could not bring them. So I brought myself." Behind him, a small band fought in the corridor. Men with grim faces, elves with blades flashing. They had come like thieves into the fortress of the Dark Lord, not to win, but to steal one life back from darkness. It was madness. It was love. Elwing's eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall. "The jewel," she rasped. "It is gone." Eärendil's expression tightened, pain flickering. "I know," he said, "but you are here. That is enough." Was it enough? The sixth question hung, bitter as iron. Could love save a world, or only a single heart? They fled through tunnels, pursued by orcs howling like wolves. Sauron's voice rang behind them, cold and amused. "Run!" he called. "Run, little star-crossed thieves. The world is still ours." They reached an outer gate as the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, a footstep, a shift in the fortress itself, as if something vast had turned its attention. Morgoth had noticed. The Vosduch grew heavy, pressing on lungs. A shadow fell across the corridor, and the torches guttered. For a moment, Elwing felt as if all light in the world was being inhaled. Eärendil pulled her close, shielding her with his body, though no body could shield against a god of darkness. Then, from far above, something pierced the gloom. A single, thin beam of white light, stabbing down through a crack in the ceiling like a spear. Everyone froze. Elwing's breath caught. She knew that light. She had seen it in cloth folds, in burning hands. The Silmaril, buried in the earth, had shifted. Perhaps the tremors of war and time had opened a path. Perhaps the world itself, tired of darkness, had cracked to let light escape. The beams struck the corridor floor and spread, pale and pure, and in that light, orcs recoiled, shrieking. Even Sauron's presence wavered for an instant, as if his shadow could not fully hold. Eärendil stared upward, awe and grief mingling. "It still shines," he whispered. Elwing felt something inside her loosen, a knot held tight for years. The jewel was not in their hands. It could not be used as proof to the west, but it had done something else. It had refused to be fully swallowed. They ran under that beam, and for a moment it was like running beneath a star in a pit. They escaped Angban's outer dungeons, not because they defeated Morgoth, but because Morgoth, in his pride, did not rush to crush them. He watched. He let them flee. He enjoyed the thought of hope escaping, only to be hunted down later. He enjoyed the irony that the Silmaril's light, instead of summoning the valor, now merely mocked the world from a crack in the ground. Eärendil and Elwing reached the open air, where Thangorodrim's peaks loomed like broken teeth against a smoke-choked sky. The air outside was cold and foul. They did not stop. They ran until their legs failed, then stumbled onward anyway, driven by the knowledge that behind them, and the enemy's eyes were on their backs. When at last they reached a hidden valley where their small company had left horses and provisions, Eärendil wrapped Elwing in a cloak and held her as if afraid she would vanish. For the first time in years, Elwing felt a kind of relief. She had been pulled from the darkest place. She had Eärendil's arms around her. Somewhere out there, their sons lived. Then disquiet returned, creeping in like cold under a door. The world was still broken. Morgoth still reigned. And the Silmaril, that one bright key, was not in any hand that could use it to open the west. In the months that followed, Eärendil and Elwing sought their sons, moving through lands where refugees huddled in caves and under trees, faces hollow. They found Elrond first, taller now, eyes older than his years. He stared at his mother as if she were an apparition. Elwing crossed the space between them and took his face in her hands. She did not speak. She simply held him, and Elrond's composure cracked. He pressed his forehead to hers, and silent tears ran down his cheeks. Elros came later, returning from a reckless scouting journey that had nearly gotten him killed. He froze when he saw Elwing, then surged forward with a sob that sounded like anger. He hugged her fiercely, as if trying to squeeze years back into existence. Maglor did not come to that reunion. He watched from a distance and then slipped away, unable to step into a circle of family without feeling the weight of what he had done to it. His last gift was absence. It was the only mercy he could still offer himself. Eärendil spoke then to the gathered refugees and hidden elves, his voice carrying across the valley. He told them what he had learned in the West, that silence did not always mean indifference, but neither did it mean rescue would arrive in time. He told them about the crack of light in Angban's depths. He told them that Morgoth could be resisted, but perhaps not defeated without a power greater than any army remaining in Middle-earth. Elwing listened, and she knew. The world had passed the point where one jewel could change everything by being carried to the right door. Now the jewel was a wound in the earth, and the door in the west remained shut. In later ages, poets would say that this was the moment hope changed shape. Not a star set in the sky for all to see, but a stubborn ember carried by fugitives across a darkening land. The transformed world that followed was one where Morgoth's shadow lasted longer, seeping deeper into the bones of Middle-earth. The great drowning of Beleriand did not come as a sudden cleansing flood after divine wrath. Instead, the land broke slowly, undermined by evil works and poisoned rivers, until whole coasts crumbled into the sea over decades. Refugees did not flee in triumphant waves, guided by valor hosts. They fled in ragged bands, hungry and suspicious, carrying stories like scars. Without Numenor's early rise, men's kingdoms formed later and poorer, built from necessity rather than gift. Where Gondor would someday stand, walls rose of darker stone, and the watch on the river was more fearful, less proud. On the plains that would be Rohan, big horsemen learned to ride not for glory, but to outrun raiding orcs that ranged farther south than they ever should have. In the Shire's green hills, when halflings finally settled, they dug their holes deeper and kept their lanterns shuttered on strange nights. For sometimes a red glow would flicker far to the west, as if the horizon remembered a jewel trapped under mountains. Elwing lived to see her sons grow into leaders, each carrying the weight of their divided heritage. Elrond became a healer of broken peoples, building sanctuaries where memory could survive. Elros became a king among men, not of a sea empire blessed by the west, but of a stubborn inland realm that held against darkness with grit and bitter wisdom. Their choices shaped centuries. They were less luminous than the figures of the old tale, but perhaps more human, forged not by divine intervention, but by endurance. Eärendil never became a star. He remained a mariner, restless, sailing coasts and rivers, carrying messages between scattered enclaves, always searching for a way to pry open the West that had refused him. He aged, slowly, as those of his blood did, but he aged nonetheless, and in his eyes the sea's endless horizon became not a promise, but a question that would not be answered. Maglor wandered alone along empty shores, singing to waves that did not care. Sometimes travelers heard his voice and wept without knowing why. Sometimes orcs heard it and shuddered, feeling for a moment the ache of something they had never possessed. He did not die quickly. He simply diminished, becoming a rumor, a ghost of remorse. And the Silmaril remained. Deep under the slag and iron of Angband, on even after armies shifted and fortresses cracked and the world's maps changed, the jewel's light continued to bleed upward through stone. It did not summon the Valar. It did not redeem the Noldor. It did not end Morgoth's reign. But it did one unbearable thing. It proved always that light still existed, trapped beneath the weight of the world. In quiet moments, Elwing would sit with Elrond and Elros and speak of Doriath's trees, of Sirian's gulls, of a time when hope had seemed simple. Her voice would sometimes falter, and Eärendil would take her hand, and their sons would look away, giving them privacy out of respect learned too young. What was the point? Elros asked once, older now, scarred, a king who had buried friends. If the West did not answer, if the jewel is lost, if Morgoth still poisons everything, what was the point of surviving? Elwing looked at him for a long time. Her eyes, once bright with youth, were now deep with endurance. The point, she said quietly, is that he did not get to decide the ending. It was not a triumphant answer. It was a refusal. In the end, that was what this altered world became. A Middle-earth where endings were delayed, where victories were smaller, where hope was not a star over all lands, but a thin, stubborn thread passed hand to hand through darkness. And far to the west, on certain nights when the wind came sharp and clean, the sea would carry a faint, impossible glimmer under the waves, as if a star was shining from beneath the earth, trapped, patient and waiting for someone to remember how to open a door that had never truly been unlocked.